Cool. So, everyone, I'd like to welcome you to MENA S&R's first launch event. This is something that's and we're particularly grateful for the team at Birmingham, University of Birmingham, for giving us the grant to launch this network. So the idea of this entire event is to show face and to kind of make up some links and kick off what we think will be a very important and a developing body in this region to kind of bring more awareness to various fields in science and religion, be it from a pedagogical lens, theological, philosophical, sociological, all the works. And what we're trying to do is provide exposure through such avenues. So what, why, and who? We have a couple of things lined up through this project activity. One of the most important things we have is a call for papers. We have submissions due November 6th, and we're awarding people about £1,000. So there's a big price tag there. So if you are aware of any young researchers or academics who'd be interested, please do let them know. We'll be sending out more details as we get along. But that is something that we're very, very excited about. In addition to that, we have a few seminars, another conference in the works, and also monthly or bi-monthly video interviews, where we interview various scholars from around the world who specialize in science, religion, from whatever religious background and whatever disciplinary method that they approach from. As I said, why we're doing this? Because I think there's a very strong need to have this kind of body here on the ground, and also to kind of help people get exposure to one another. A lot of people are working in their silos, and I think it's about time that we break people out of those and provide some kind of common platform where everybody can meet and greet, share ideas, and grow together. With that said, I'd like to introduce all of you to the steering committee. So there are a couple of us on here. I'll start off with myself. So my name is Shuaib Ahmed Malik, and I am a professor of the natural sciences at Zayed University. Don't let the title deceive you, though. I've completely shifted to science and religion since I started the degree, the job. I've moved from chemical engineering all the way to science and religion. All my research is now entirely in this area. My most recent book was on Islam and evolution, and I'm now working on other avenues of Islam and science. So that's a quick intro of me. Rachel, over to you.
Okay, sure. I'm here. I work at the University of Haifa and also at the VU in Amsterdam. I'm also, like Shoaib, just really excited to meet and hear from all of you. Want to thank the speakers who generously agreed to kick us off on this first event, and excited to hear who else is out there.
Thanks. Nijme?
Yes. Hi, I'm so glad to be here. It's an honor. It's an honor to be here and to listen and to learn from you all. I'm Nijmi. I'm from Baka, Haifa University. I'm a PhD student studying the relationship between science and evolution and Islam. My study is about the education system in Israel, Arab students. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Rolly.
Hi all. I'm Rolly. I hail from the same institution as Noach that we're going to hear soon, from the STS program at Bar Ilan University. I've been doing history of science for a while now, and in various capacities, I've been working on science and religion in different ways they interact, and I'm fascinated by it both intellectually and personally. And like you said, it feels necessary to have presence on the ground of people that can interact on the topic, that come at it from the different perspectives that we have here. One of the main examples for me was when Rachel and Nijmi started a few years back with another friend of mine, Meir. They started a program of looking at evolution studies in schools in Israel in both Jewish, Muslim, and Christian aspects of it, and for me it was a mind opener, and ever since then I've been looking at the world differently, and I want to get as much of that as I can from as many perspectives. So yeah, I'm here.
Thanks. Next, we have what looks like to be the sheikh of the group. It's Abdullah. Abdullah, go ahead.
Well, thank you all very much for being here. We're all very honored for having you here today. Abdullah Galadari. I'm an associate professor at Khalifa University in the United Arab Emirates. And similar to Shuaib, I do have an engineering background, but I have also moved into scriptural hermeneutics, which I currently work on. So thank you all very much for being here. And we look forward to all of your participation.
Thank you, Abdullah. Next we have is Alper.
When you said Sheikh of the group, I thought you were going to introduce me.
Oh.
I was getting prepared, but okay. Hi guys, Alper Bilgili. I'm also studying the relationship between science and religion from a Turkish perspective. I met with most of those guys in a book project about the topic. And it's great to have you here today. Stefano, I admire your work a lot, and others as well, Michael Rees. So it's going to be great, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Alper. And finally, the man behind the scenes in terms of designing everything that you see here is Rushdie. Mohammed, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good night, and good morning. My name is Muhammad Rushdie, and I work behind the scenes helping the team with anything creative, design related. And it's been more than that too, and it's really fun working with everyone. It's my first time working with in this academic field in religion and science, so it's a new journey for me as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So that's the team, guys. As you can see, we come from various parts of the world, and we have our own disciplinary specializations, whatever that may entail. And all of us came together for this one vision of trying to create a body that can hopefully help give science and religion some meaning and some ground. With that said and cleared, we'd like to now move on and introduce each of the speakers. I'll hand over now this to Rachel, who'll be taking over and sharing the rest of the session. Go ahead, Rachel. The floor is all yours.
Okay, sure. Are you going to make the presentation continue, or you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'll do it. That's cool.
Okay, awesome. Either way. At first I had suggested maybe the speakers would also introduce themselves, but my fellow committee members prevailed on me to introduce all of them ourselves. So maybe we'll start with Stefano. Shoaib, you have his slide?
Sure. There we go.
Shoaib is my lovely assistant right now, but I still see welcome on my screen.
Sorry. Here you go.
Here we are. Okay, so as Shoaib was mentioning, we really wanted to try to work not only to get geographical diversity here and diversity of the religious traditions that we're being focused on, but also specifically disciplinary diversity, which maybe raises as many questions as it brings food for thought. So that will hopefully be part of the interesting second half of our time together today, because we could all raise questions to each other. How do we actually bring these different disciplinary perspectives together? And we're starting out with Stefano, who is a philosopher, and he works in Morocco, although he's worked in universities around the world. And right now he's also the co-editor with Nidal Gassoum of the Cambridge University Press series, Elements in Islam and the Sciences. And I have not yet had the honor or privilege of hearing you, Stefano, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say today and bring to all of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, salam alaikum and shalom, or maybe boker tov. I'm not sure what time it is over there, but I guess it's afternoon already. So I have a presentation. If I can share my screen, okay. You should be seeing it. Can you confirm?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here, to have this opportunity to showcase a bit my research and most importantly to share ideas and views. Yes, I'm currently based at Al Akhawain University in Ifran in Morocco. Perhaps a part of Morocco that not everyone is familiar with. It's up in the mountains, so soon it will be quite cold. It snows in the winter, which makes of Ifran a big attraction for Moroccan tourists in particular. A couple of words about my background since and activities, since that may be a bit confusing. So I've been active in the field of Islam and contemporary science over the past, I'd say, 10 years at least, and I have different hats. The first hat is the Islamological hat. I'm interested in reconstructing the contemporary debate on Islam and science from an external perspective. And this is what I've been doing in particular on the occasion of my 2014 book, perhaps meanwhile a slightly outdated book, Islam and the Quest for Modern Science. So, you know, getting an idea of what is going on without necessarily taking a stance. I've been doing that, as I said, while writing this book and a few other works, including peer-reviewed articles. Then I also have a philosophical hat. Every now and then I intervene in the debate as well. You know, I have my stance, I have my ideas, I have my critique and criticism as well. In particular, I'm critical towards the presence of what I consider to be pseudoscience in the debate. And this is something I've been doing while working on a book in Italian. It has been published by Rationalist Society based in my home country. The book is titled La Mezzaluna e la Luna Dimezzata, which means the crescent and the splitting moon. The pun doesn't work as well in English, I'm afraid. And I hope to have some version of this book translated into English or adapted sometime soon. There seems to be some background.
Yeah, I've taken care of that. Sorry.
Then I have the promoter's hat. Sorry, perhaps the term promoter is not the best, but I haven't been able to find anything better. Meaning I try to interact with researchers in the field, give them visibility, encourage them to develop their work and ideas further, and to make them visible, to have them out there. And this is something I'm doing in particular while working on the Cambridge University Press Element series, Islam and Sciences, with my friend and senior colleague, Professor Nidal Gassoum, based at the American University of Sharjah. So it's a series of booklets, each one dedicated to a specific topic in the field. And the first booklet, an introductory one, co-authored by Professor Nidal Gassoum and me, should be out soon. And finally, there's the pedagogic hat, the teacher's hat, or the university instructor's hat, if you prefer, which is the one I'd like to talk about today. Since I joined AUI in summer 2016, I teach courses on Islam and science. Now, these courses, it's in fact the same course that has been imparted 12 times, of course, with adjustments, changes over time, with around 30 students per class, which means that meanwhile, hundreds of students have been exposed to it, a few hundreds. Al Akhawain University in Ifran is a liberal arts college. It's a public English-speaking Moroccan college, and my courses are imparted under the general heading, the general title of History of Ideas, and are part of the so-called core courses, meaning all students, regardless of their major and minor, have to take them as part of their curriculum. I mean, not necessarily my courses, but courses in the humanities that contribute to the general knowledge, and my courses on Islam and science are part of that, meaning I usually teach students who are majoring in business administration, computer science, or political science or international relations, even HR, so non-specialists in things philosophy. You can find a copy of the most recent syllabus. You can find there on the slide the link. But just to describe the courses quickly, the intended learning outcomes are getting an historical overview of the science-religion debate with a focus on the modern and contemporary discussion, but including very important historic affairs, the Galileo one, the Darwin's affair, Darwin's theory of evolution, and then moving on to important, impactful modern and contemporary authors, including Bukai, Sardar, Yahya. By the way, Noah, I noticed you have the Atlas of Creation in your bookshelf. It was the first thing that stood out when you came online. And Hidalgo Sum and others. The list has been adjusted over time, excluding some authors, adding other ones. This is by no means exhaustive. To adopt and engage with Ian Barber's typology for the interaction of religion and science. I guess that everyone here is familiar with Barber's seminal work. He came up with 20 plus years ago, perhaps more, with a typology to describe how religion and science can interact. Meanwhile, it's a bit outdated. It has great historical significance, and pedagogically speaking, I use it in my courses because it's quite simple to grasp. It fits beginners, as my students are, and I always encourage them, to critically elaborate on it and possibly come up with different new categories. And finally, the most important learning outcomes, considering that, again, I'm teaching in the framework of a liberal arts institution, is that students formulate a well-argued opinion on the theories, ideas, and controversies covered through appropriate technical and philosophical vocabulary needed to discuss science and religion, including concepts like scientific theory, supernatural miracle, and so on. So,
good afternoon, my sister. How are you today?
Seem to have some background noise again. So the most important thing is not what students think at the end of the course, but that they do think, and perhaps that their thoughts are more structured, their opinions are more better informed than when they started. The course echoes two experts' recommendation. I'm referring to Clayton and Rayleigh's article in Saigo in 1998, that a science and religion course should be an advocacy for the discipline of science and religion itself, rather than for any one particular theological agenda within the discipline. That being said, I have some general remarks about these courses. I have no structured data. I apologize for that. I have never used my courses, as field work. But this is what I can say. I noticed some general challenges. By general, I mean challenges that are shared with all colleagues who teach courses in the humanities at this institution. In general, I must say that my courses are perceived as part of philosophy, the philosophical field. It's no mystery that by training I am an expert in philosophy. I also impart courses in philosophical thought. And generally speaking, philosophy has a bad reputation in Morocco. So students come to my courses remembering philosophy as that one subject that gave them a hard time in high school, where they had to memorize everything, word for word, word by word, in order to pass their baccalaureate, their high school final exam. Also, students at AUI are just adjusting to the liberal arts model, to using English as a language of instruction, which of course constitutes a significant challenge. And argument for itself. And generally speaking, courses in the humanities are not perceived by my students, by our students, as a priority, because as I said, they are part of the common course. They are majoring and minoring in other fields. Then there are some specific challenges, and by specific, I mean challenges that are related to the course content. Students usually come to my courses without familiarity with science, entertain slogans about science, but they don't quite know what method or methods of science are about. And generally speaking, I have to say that they show strong resistance to the criticism or even just the discussion of certain notions, especially if we're talking about notions they've been exposed to since high school. So, for instance, they are convinced that the Quran is full of scientific notions, the so-called scientific miracles, or that evolution is just a theory, there's no proof for it, or that evolution is about human beings coming from monkeys, and so on. Also, although I have identified the intended learning outcomes that are listed on my syllabi, I keep wondering whether they should be considered as fully achieved if a student persists in their belief, for instance, in creationism or in various forms of pseudoscience. So far, I have been very flexible. I have regarded that kind of position as, an expression of diversity, and insofar as a student is able to argue some way for their opinion, for the views that they entertain at the end of the course, it's fine with me, but I keep debating, and of course I would like to hear your opinion whether that is a good choice. Generally speaking, again, I must remark that careful attention while designing such courses must be paid to political, cultural, institutional, and even individual aspects in order to avoid counterproductive friction at various levels, as well as pedagogic ineffectiveness. There have been a few incidents, I would say, misunderstandings and so on. Nothing major, again, but again, one has to be aware of certain challenges that are just around the corner when one sets out to teach this kind of course. Ending on a positive note, though, I have to say that these courses, in my opinion, also offer great opportunities. So it's true that most students will be familiar with and supportive of views hostile to evolution, or they will, they come to class with a certain baggage. Other ones, a minority, out to me as atheist, and then they tend to use evolution, the way Richard Dawkins uses it. A very few others will entertain more liberal views on religion or evolution as harmonizable with evolution, but regardless of what their views are, the important thing is that students do come to class with views, with ideas. And in my experience, if provided with an adequate safe space and with a serene learning atmosphere, they will be eager to express and debate such views, which is very important, again, considering that I'm teaching within the framework of the liberal arts model. So it's more likely in some that students already entertain some views, have ideas about such debates, although possibly superficial one, although possibly misleading ones, then in a standard classical course about the great Western philosophers of antiquity, Plato, Aristotle, and so on. And also, courses on Islam and science offer opportunities to explore and appreciate local or regional figures that would be left untapped or insufficiently capitalized on by typical education in high school and also at the university level. Just to mention two examples, Averroes. Most students are familiar with this name as the name of a hospital or a pharmacy or of a school, but they have no idea of who Ibn Rushd, Averroes, was, what kind of ideas he advanced, or important paleontological discoveries made in the country. I'm thinking here of Jebel Yahud and the Homo sapiens fossils found here in Morocco, as well as the achievements and views of contemporary Muslim scientists. I often jokingly remark in my courses that my students are more familiar with the legend of the US-American astronaut hearing the call to prayer while exploring the moon than with the actual existence of real-life Muslim astronauts. So again, I apologize if I, can only offer some very disorganized ideas. In a sense, I do have some experience with teaching Islam and science, but I have never treated my courses, my classes as field work. And also what I'm mostly lacking is exchange with colleagues who busy themselves with similar ideas or possibly teach in a similar way. And I'm very curious and eager to feedback and suggestions. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I actually was not aware you were going to speak about your course at First Today's, and I really enjoyed all the material you brought and have a number of questions already. But the way we've structured today is that first we're going to hear from all four of our speakers and then use the second half of the meeting for conversations and questions and discussion. So thank you, Stefano. Now we're going to move to Noah. I was prevailed upon by the other committee members to invite my distinguished dissertation advisor, Noah, to be our second speaker. He founded the one and only STS program here in Israel, and he is a foremost scholar of both Judaism and science, Israel and science, and he's done a lot of interesting things. The last line of his bio is true. It is sometimes true when I say that Noah Ephron was my dissertation advisor. People do think that I worked with Noah Ephron, but I am glad that you are here today, Noah, and I am looking forward to hearing your presentation as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I am delighted, really thrilled, honored also to see this group taking shape. And I want to say thank you happen for your vision and your energy. It is beautiful. It is a beautiful and inspiring thing. And Stefano, thank you for that really rich description of the aims and challenges of teaching science and religion in Morocco. It was fascinating and impressive and really valuable and entirely new to me. I am going to go in a different, less self-reflective way, and I hope that this is okay. The brief that I was given for these brief remarks was to say something about my own research about religion and science that might help illuminate some sort of research that might come from within this group, one sort among very many that might spring from this group. And I imagine it as offering one small tile in what will end up being the large, majestic mosaic that the researchers in this group will create in the fullness of time. So that is what I'm going to try to do. The starting point of my own work over the past few years has been a question that was first asked in an academic context 103 years ago in 1919 by the great American sociologist Thorstein Veblen in a then famous essay called The Intellectual Preeminence of Jews in Modern Europe. And his premise was this, quote, "The civilization of Christendom continues today to draw heavily on the Jews for men devoted to science and scholarly pursuits. It is not only that men of Jewish extraction continue to supply more than a proportionate quota of the rank and file engaged in scientific and scholarly work, but a disproportionate number of the men to whom modern science looks for guidance and leadership. These men are Jews. That much is notorious," end quote. So his question was, why? Why and how did Jews become so prominent? Phenomenon that would only become much more pronounced in the decades after Veblen wrote his essay. And it's a remarkable phenomenon, emblematized, or maybe fetishized is a better word, by the well-known statistics about Jews and Nobel Prizes, where more than 1 in 4 Nobel Prize winners in physics, comes from Jewish heritage, and 1 in 4 in physiology and medicine, and 1 in 5 in chemistry, and 2 in 5 in economics. All this while Jews account for 0.2% of the world's population, meaning that as far as the Nobel Prize is concerned, Jews overperform in Stockholm at a rate of between 10,000 and 20,000%, which is an extraordinary phenomenon, and an extraordinary phenomenon about an important matter, the advance of modern science. So you can see why Veblen and many others since have tried to understand why this happened. The explanation that Veblen gave for this notorious fact, as he called it, was that Jews had only lately freed themselves from the oppression of their rabbis and their stultifying traditions, but they hadn't yet been accepted enough in Christian society, he wrote, to come under the thumb of Christian ministers and politicians and fat cats. Jews were the free radicals of Western civilization, Veblen wrote. Unbound, they could be skeptical about all received pieties. They had no pieties. They excelled, Veblen said, at irony and at alienation. And these traits, Veblen thought, were just what it took to be brilliant at science. He wrote, quote, the first requisite for constructive work in modern science is a skeptical frame of mind. Unmoored, a wanderer in the intellectual no man's land, the Jew becomes a disturber of the intellectual peace, end quote, which, Veblen said, is just what it takes to overturn the laws of physics, or to rewrite the book of life, or to reinvent the human psyche, as Einstein and Jacques Loeb and Freud had recently done as he was writing. In the century since Veblen gave his explanation, dozens and dozens of others have often how Jewish genes or Jewish love of learning or books or particular Jewish traditions of learning account for the great presence of Jews in contemporary sciences. I have a lot to say about these theories, which I find distasteful and wrong. I find them implausible and mostly ahistorical because, for instance, they overlook the fact that until the middle end of the 19th century, Jews showed no particular aptitude for science at all. The great sociologist Jacobs wrote toward the end of the 19th century, did a survey of Jews in the professions and found that Jews had no aptitude for any science except for medicine. So I tried a new approach in addressing this question. Everyone always assumes that the right place to start, if you want to understand the central place of Jews in modern science and the central place of science in modern Jewish culture, is to start with Veblen's question, why are Jews so successful at science? But maybe it occurred to me, you can't answer that question until you ask and answer some prior questions, like, why have the sciences been so remarkably successful among modern Jews? Why did so many 20th century Jews in so many places turn to sciences for a career and for a vocation? Why did, for instance, American rabbis lavish praise on scientists from their pulpit, including atheist scientists, including scientists who were Jewish by birth but had no interest in Judaism? Why did Jewish philanthropists rush to support research hospitals and universities and science museums and planetariums and all the other institutions of science? Why did Jews in the Soviet Union argue that rigorous science education would be what would transform Jews from being petty bourgeois shopkeepers into becoming productive proletarians? And why did the principal architect of modern political Zionism, Theodor Herzl, write that a Jewish state would be the most scientific and technologically advanced society that history had ever known, presenting a model of progressive technocratic utopia that would be admired and copied the world over? And the answer to all these questions, not the only answer, but an important answer, is that many Jews came to believe in the decades before and ever since, Veblen wrote, that modern science and technology could play a big role in helping Jews find a place in the mostly Western societies they found themselves in the world. And so Jews looked to science and technology to advance the values of progress and inclusion and equality for which they took science itself to stand for. They looked to science and technology to dislodge old cultural elites and to democratize society. Just how science and technology might do this was captured, for instance, by the Scottish Jewish London mathematician Hyman Levy, who wrote in a best-selling book called The Universe of Science that was published in London and New York simultaneously in 1933 and then went through dozens of editions. He wrote, quote, "The ideal of scientific knowledge is to reach a system capable of being isolated from the subjective world of every individual member of the human race. It will create a set of statements that are acceptable to all. The formulations of science are statements that are invariant with respect to individuals," Levy wrote, end quote. The great Jewish American sociologist of science, Robert Merton, quoting Levy, wrote in 1938 in a very moving article in the journal Philosophy of Science that was really about Nazism and science. He wrote, "The sentiments embodied in the ethos of science are characterized by such terms as intellectual honesty and integrity, organized skepticism, disinterestedness, impersonality. It is the basic assumption of modern science that scientific propositions are invariant with respect to the individual," he's quoting Levy, "and to groups. One sentiment which is assimilated by the scientist from the very outset of his training pertains to the purity of science. Science cannot suffer itself to become a handmaiden of theology or of economy or of state," end quote. So science and technology, in this view, which was close to universal among Jews in the 20th century, though Rachel in her dissertation has not entirely true, that there were examples of other important people who did not buy this, but it was very close to universal, I believe. These science and technology promised in the eyes of these people to create a kind of neutral space within Western society, a space in which Jews, like everyone else, a space that Jews, like everyone else, could inhabit. At the same time, Jews in modern times looked to science and technology to dissipate the parochialism of Judaism itself, of Jews themselves, as they made their way from shtetls, from ghettos, into the cultural centers of the West. In the 20th century, Jews turned to science in huge, heroic numbers, partly because they believed science could help Jews become part of, say, American society, or tragically German society, or French, or British, or Russian societies, or that it led them to believe that they could create an autonomous Jewish state that would find a place as an equal among equals in the community of nations in global society. They figured that science and technology could help to reform all these societies, reform Western Christendom, to use Veblen's phrase, to make the West more fit for Jews. And at the same time, science could help reform Jews to make Jews more fit for modern Western society. And obviously, there is a lot to say about this, which story I have right here just told in far too sweeping a way. There are footnotes to be footnoted and stipulations to be stipulated and qualifications to be qualified and exceptions to be accepted and objections to be objected. And I wrote a book about all of this if you want to see the footnotes and the stipulations, qualifications, exceptions, and objections. But my point is that Jewish attitudes towards modern science and technology can only be understood in the broader context of Jews' very complex and ambivalent meeting with quote unquote modernity, which is of course inseparable from the very complex and ambivalent meetings with colonialism. And I think, and this is the point I'm really getting at, all of this is true in all sorts of ways, important ways, of meetings with science and technology throughout our region, throughout the Middle East and North Africa. In the swelter of August 1960, Abba Eban, who was fresh back from serving as Israel's ambassador to the US and then a member of Knesset, and he had just become Minister of Culture, and he was also the president of the Weizmann Institute all at the same time. He invited 120 politicians and government administrators and scientists from 40 different countries, almost all of them emerging nations in Africa and Asia, to an international conference that he organized on the Weizmann Institute campus on, quote, the role of science in the advancement of new states, end quote. Eban said that, quote, the theme of this conference is the capacity and duty of the modern scientific movement to enrich the lives of newly emerging communities. At the center of its deliberation stands the two transformations which dominate the life of our century, the 20th century, the rise of Asian and African peoples to independence, and the rapid progress of science and technology. Eben went on to say that the success of each of these transformations depended on the other. Quote, "The history of our time will be written largely by the two groups of men who came together for the first time at the Rehovot conference, at that conference in Weizmann, the statesmen of the developing nations and the leaders of the scientific disciplines. Bringing these two groups together in a way that might produce freedom and health and democracy for developing nations," Eben went on, "was a task for which Israel," he claimed, "was uniquely fit." Eben said that among the developing countries, quote, "strong currents of passion still threaten to submerge liberty, hardly won and deeply cherished. But," he said, "Israel can keep this from happening because," quote, we are, by the fortune of history, a member of the modern world of science and technology, and we are also one of the new states of the international community, a partner in the modern enterprise of national liberation." And there is a lot to unpack here concerning the exquisitely complex way that Eben saw Israel's relationship to the developed world and to the developing world, to the East and to the West, and to science. How Eben saw Israel both as a subject of colonialism and as an agent of colonialism at the same time. In the next year, in 1961, Egypt's President General Gamal Abdel Nasser gave a speech that would be remembered as one of his most important at the quote-unquote Egypt Festival of Science in Cairo, in which he described how under his leadership, citizens of Egypt would now be turning their attention to the quote-unquote good of the people rather than the individual in an effort to create a new and modern Egypt, reshaped in the image of modern science. Egypt had lately started sending a steady stream of young men, thousands of them, to get training in science and engineering, mostly in the Soviet Union, as part of an effort to remake Egypt as this modern scientific nation state. Over the next years, Egypt would undertake the vast scale, quote, construction of vital agricultural and electrical projects that aim to the wellness of all citizens, end quote, as the magazine Al Hilal reported, quote unquote, a monument to modern technology, the great pyramids of our time, end quote. And there is a lot to unpack here too, concerning the exquisitely complex way that Nasser saw science and technology, both as products of Western colonialism and as tools to free his country from Western colonialism and to create a new Egypt that was modern, but at the same time embodied the greatness and the gloriousness of ancient Egypt, the ancient Egypt that had built the pyramids. And of course, one finds similar efforts in many other places in the Middle East and North Africa in the 20th century and continuing to today. It is a story of entanglements of science and technology with religious identities, with nationalism and emerging and shifting national identities, with colonialism, with modernization. It is an exquisitely complex story, this embrace of science as a clear product of colonialism and in a way as a tool to address colonialism. And in some cases, Israel stands out as a tool also to advance colonialism. And in each place in our region, I would wager that it has played out differently and continues to play out differently today. I'll only say that my ignorance is vast, total, but it seems to me that a story like this in Turkey is of crucial political importance and incredible fascination. And of course, I think that something like that is true all over. And I think that all of this is important to understand both our histories, and I think it's also important to make sense of our world today. The complicated meetings of religion, nationalism, colonialism are very much a part of our lives here in this region. Without understanding them, it is impossible to make sense, to take examples that are close to home for me. It is impossible to make sense the vision of Israel's late president and late prime minister Shimon Peres for a new Middle East, which vision he created around the time that he was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize, and which vision improbably, impossibly, insanely delegated much of the work of maintaining peaceful relations between Israelis and Palestinians to massive joint technological development projects that he envisaged Jews and Palestinians undertaking together. It was Paris's belief that devoting ourselves, Jews, Muslims, Druze, Christians, and all the rest, to creating and administering together cutting-edge technologies, that this would change the way that we see ourselves and the way that the Western world sees us and treats us. It is an impossible vision, but one worth trying to understand and unpack. Just this morning, I saw on Twitter a tweet from the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates in Israel, championing a new partnership agreement between the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence in the UAE and that same Weizmann Institute where Abba Eban held his conference. This new collaboration, the video and the tweet showed, would produce scientific breakthroughs that will reshape healthcare and genomics and economics and more around the world. It would demonstrate around science has to offer the world. And a tweet like that, fleeting as it is, it's soon buried at the bottom of my feed, is part of a very long and complicated and enduring tradition, and one that in the fullness of time, some of the people in this virtual room on this Zoom might help us all come to better understand and make us better able to understand the world in which we live and to act in that world. And that is just one small tile in the mosaic that we are together starting to build here today. Thank you.
Wow. Noah always sees the right tweets on the right mornings. Was that amazing? Michael, I am going to quickly share my screen because obviously in the spirit of our science and religion group, Shoaib needed to go and pray. So quickly, I'm just going to mention that Michael now deserves a rebuttal from the United Kingdom, and he too is a leader in science and religion studies and has been involved in work all around the world, including I've had the honor of having him advise projects that I've been involved in. He is coming in the education and bioethics hat. Since we already covered philosophy, history, STS, we did 3 fields. We're moving on to 2 more. I'm sure 15 minutes will completely suffice for that. And now I will stop showing my screen. Luckily, he is also a priest in the Church of England, in addition to a leading science educator. So, Michael, if you want to try to share your screen.
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks, Rachel, for that extremely generous introduction. Very much appreciated. So, everybody, obviously, the first thing I want to say is thank you ever so much to Rachel and Shoaib. Rachel, I've known a number of years and worked with a number of years. Shoaib, I don't know so well, but he very modestly didn't mention that latest book of his has very recently, literally in the last couple of weeks, won the academic prize of the International Society for Science and Religion, because we now have book prizes each year, which is an outstanding achievement. So I realize he's disappeared, but Rachel, you can tell him that I'm really impressed. First of all, to all of you, not just the 2 of you, but the others who will briefly introduce themselves at the beginning, congratulations on getting this network launched. One of the problems with work on science and religion is that it has not been global. It's been dominated for too long by certain geographical areas, and it's really good to see it getting widened. And I am genuinely honoured and delighted to be here, particularly because apart from occasional brief working visits, I am not somebody who was brought up or has lived in the Middle East and North Africa. Now, I thought I'd start rather ambitiously with a brief overview of research on science religion in, as Rachel says, education and bioethics. And then I'm going to give 3 brief examples that I've been involved with. Depending on the country, and there are enormous differences across the world, country from country, there are 2 problems I see when we talk about research in science and religion in education and bioethics. One is that in some countries and in some groups, there's a widespread assumption that there always has to be conflict between science and religion. So things are understood through a single lens rather narrowly. The other is that there is only one way of reading scripture, and I think that has also been a problem. Now, what is often needed is, I think, a more nuanced understanding of science and a more nuanced understanding of religion. And just to be clear, because most of you don't know me at all, of course, I am passionate about both science and religion. Rachel generously mentioned I'm a priest in the Church of England, so I'm a Christian. But both science and both religion are fundamentally about truth, and truth is rarely served by blind obedience to one's own personal understanding or notion of truth. It is always good for any of us to be open to seeing things in a new light, understanding things differently. Science, by its very nature, is always open to the possibility of refutation and change. And when I read the scriptures, particularly my own scriptures, the Christian scriptures, but when I read the scriptures in Islam, Judaism, and other religions, I see people open to the possibility of God revealing himself in new ways, giving fresh understandings. Each of us in the light of eternity, however significant we are, is so small that we do only have a partial understanding. So in words from my own scriptures, now we see darkly as in a mirror, but one day we can hope to see more clearly face to face. Now, I want to give 3 examples. The first one's going to take much longer than the other 2 because it's an empirical study. It's work I did with a doctoral student who finished about 2 years ago, Jo Sell. And this is taken from one article that we've co-authored after her doctorate finished. And what it's about is faith-sensitive relationships and sex education, because that's one of the areas in which I work in education. Faith-sensitive relationships and sex education in areas of low religious observance. Now, the background to this is that in England, my country, relationships education and relationships and sex education, RSE, were given new statutory guidance for implementation in September 2020. The shorthand is what that means is that in all schools in England, whether private, whether state, for 5-year-olds right through to 16-year-olds, relationship education and relationship and sex education is compulsory. Relationship education is for primary schools until they're 11. Relationships and sex education is for 11 to 16-year-olds. And England, as you probably know, is a country which varies enormously in religious observance. So I work in London. It's difficult to generalize. It's always dangerous because one can end up stereotyping. But London is a city where large numbers of people have a strong religious faith and where religious practices are quite widespread. You go to other parts of England, particularly in some rural areas in the countryside, and the opposite is the case. I'm very aware that's the opposite from many other countries in the world where religious observance is higher in more rural areas. We always seem to do things a bit oddly in England. The question that Jo and I were interested in was how can relationships and sex education be taught in ways that take account of students who have a religious faith when we live in a country where that's not universally shared. And there's actually a shortage of literature that explores the positive ways in which religion and sex education intersect, precisely because much of the literature has that relationship framed within a discourse of conflict, which, as I mentioned earlier on, is important in England in quite a lot of areas of science and religion, and indeed in many countries around the world, as has already been alluded to in the context of evolution. Now, in my experience, after many years of working in England in this area, and Jo would agree with me, she's many years worked in this area as well, respectfully responding to students' views in a way that takes account of their faith is seldom evident in relationships and sex education, unless the school is itself a faith school. I won't give you a complete lecture about schooling in England, which makes the education system in Israel look gloriously simple to understand, but we have what are called faith schools, which are quite numerous. It depends how you quantify them, but roughly think of it as something like a quarter of all schools are faith schools. Some it's quite tenuous, some it's very deep. But the majority of schools are not faith schools, and most teachers, they're not antagonistic about religion, they just don't find it very meaningful. And so sex education in particular had got into a bit of a rut of being taken without much discussion about values in general and religious values in particular. And what Joe did was field work in 4 different schools. These are not the real school names, they're just made up. Look at schools 1, 2, and 3, all of which occur in cities. The first school, school 1, most of the students are Christians or Muslim. The second school, they're virtually all Christian. The third school, the very large majority are Muslim, with some Hindus. And then the fourth school, rural, most students are identifying as agnostic and atheist, with about 20% identifying as Christian and a small percentage, a range of other either faith traditions or worldviews. Now, we asked students how important religion was to them. So just this is what you'd expect. Fitzgerald, St. Joseph's and Snellgrove, those first 3 inner city schools, basically, majority of students, quite large majorities, are saying it's either very important or it's important, whereas in the rural school, only a small percentage, about 12, are saying faith is either very important or important. Now, here is the crucial slide. Students were asked to respond in each of the 4 schools to the statement, I think we should learn what different religions say about relationships and sex, even if we don't have a religion ourselves. So, perhaps not too surprisingly, Fitzgerald, St. Joseph's and Snellgrove, roughly speaking, most of the people are saying either they completely agree with that or they agree with that. But the interesting thing is that the data for the rural school, if you look at that set of figures down there, are pretty similar to the other 3 schools. Now, these are students aged 14, 15 years old. What I'm glad to say we're seeing is students in the rural school, where you remember about 88% were saying religion wasn't important to them. They're saying, yeah, I think we should learn what different religions say about relationships and sex. In other words, you can't in the most secular school, the rural school, within a discourse of conflict. It's a much more open discourse. It's not a discourse saying, I want to go to the mosque or to the synagogue or church, but it's a discourse saying, I want to know what different religions are saying about marriage, about relationships before your marriage, about sex in general, which I find pretty encouraging. Now, the other 2 examples will take me less time. The second one is to do with a paper I've written, which is arguing about how we should teach evolution education, which probably rather a lot of us have spent many years of our lives either thinking about or teaching about, researching about or writing about. And I just want to have only 2 points in this slide. The first one is just to ask, is evolution a controversial issue? Now, of course, it depends what you mean by the word controversial. If one means, is evolution a subject about which people often have strong opinions and believe very passionately it must be taught or must not be taught, it's certainly controversial. But if you mean in a narrower sense, is there among scientists scientific controversy about whether the fundamentals of the theory of evolution are valid or not? I think one has to answer that there is not deep controversy. The large majority of scientists around the world are comfortable with a theory of evolution. Now, rather than get too hung up in schools on discussions about whether evolution is controversial or not, what I've argued, and I've found much more helpful is to think of treating evolution simply as a sensitive issue. Now, the good news is this does not require teachers to go on training days. It does not require people to spend hours reading academic articles. Teachers are good at dealing with sensitive issues. If they have a child in their class who know that they've lost a parent recently, they just automatically, in well over 95% of cases, behave differently. They're more gentle. They're less likely to tell certain sorts of jokes. If they're teaching in biology about, for example, the heart and heart disease, and they know that some of the children in the class have relatives who've had heart attacks, they teach it more sensitively. So all I'm suggesting is that it would be very useful when teaching evolution for any school teacher, and it'll be true in universities and colleges as well, to keep in mind there are going to be at least some students in the group who come from either family backgrounds or religious backgrounds that are not comfortable with the theory of evolution. And it's therefore essential that the teacher does not denigrate such students, does not patronize them, does not give the impression that they or their families or their religion are mistaken, or even worse, stupid, old-fashioned, or anything else. Treat evolution as a sensitive issue, and although I don't have any empirical evidence to back up my claim, I suspect we'd end up having more students who would be prepared to then learn something about why do most scientists think evolution is such an important theory. And I think that would be good for science education, which is my day job, working as a science educator. And it might be good for softening some of the antagonism that often exists between science and religion. Okay, my third example is even briefer and goes back ages ago. And I was trying to find a photograph on the web about this because I vaguely remember seeing some from, years ago, but I can't find any. This was the first conference in the United Kingdom that was what was called a consensus conference. Now, the idea about a consensus conference, if you don't know, is you get a group of non-experts, ordinary people. It's a bit like selecting a jury in countries that have juries in criminal cases. They're meant to be not necessarily representative, they're meant to be a cross-section of society. The exact number isn't important. I think there are about 15 or so in this one. And the conference, which lasted 3 days, expected these people to come up with a report. And the report, I'm just going to get rid of the telephone because I'm not available at the moment. The report was about, that's interesting. The report was about whether or not it was acceptable to use genetic engineering to try and improve crops. And the short version of what happened was that on the first day, because they were given a list of experts that they would hear from so that they could learn about genetic engineering and crop biotechnology so they could write their report. And perhaps unsurprisingly, because this is the United Kingdom, as I've said earlier, a fairly secular society, even in 1994, there was no theologian as an expert. There were loads of people, there were philosophers, there were sociologists, there were a lot of scientists, there were farmers, etc., but no theologians. And this cross-section of about 15 people said, we want to hear some of the theological arguments. And so the organizers of the conference scrambled around, and I think I was the only person they knew who had any interest and was writing academically about theology and plant crops at the time, because by coincidence, a colleague and I had done some work in this area. So I went down, I actually dressed up in my clerical garb, my clerical clothing, which I don't normally do unless I'm taking services. But as they wanted a theologian, I thought they could see they got a theologian. And of course, had extremely high quality questions. And in fact, I spent an awful lot of the next decade talking to public groups, farmers, mothers' unions, school children about the theology of genetic engineering, and found people very open because, of course, and this is the last point I'll make, there isn't a great deal in any of the world's scriptures specifically about genetic engineering. But what there is, as all of us know, is there's a lot about justice, about food, about society, about what the purpose of life is, all of which are utterly relevant whenever we're talking about any new technology. So I think theology plays a central role within bioethics. And I go back to my original 2 points. The only dangers are just in some countries, not the countries represented here, I think, but in some countries, assuming that there's always going to be a clash between religious perspectives and broadest perspectives when talking about bioethics. And the other extreme is what you sometimes find from people who just think it's terribly easy to say what the religious view is on any particular bioethical issue. And in my experience, it's often worth going quite slowly and talking things through. Great. I know we're not having questions now, Rachel, but thank you very much indeed, everybody. That's me finished.
Wow, Michael, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Our final speaker today is going to be Shiri. Let's see. Here we go. I'm going to get her slide up and running in a second here. Shiri, you will show us what sociology can do now, from what I understand. Speaking from a perspective of someone who is sitting in the US, not your fault, but at least you're a woman. And you've worked on data also from all over the world. And I've been had the joy of hearing you and your fascinating results. So I can't wait to hear more about what you're going to share today. And I believe you have your own presentation. So I will stop the share of your biography so you can put up yours.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Or good morning here, good afternoon, good evening. I think as Stefano said. I think it is a testament to my great esteem and respect for the organizing committee that I immediately said yes to participating, even though it is 7 a.m. on a Sunday, which at least in the US is the Lord's Day. So I'm just going to share a little bit of an overview of sociology, and I think my presentation follows really well after Michael's, but also, of course, Stefano and Noah's, and I've just included my email in case anybody wants or needs to follow up. So, I really hesitate to take the role of a spokesperson for sociology. It's a big field, and so please don't hold me to it. This is my personal perspective as someone who's been involved in this. But I kind of wanted to pull out some themes, I think, that sociologists of science and religion, I should say that, as Rachel mentioned, my perspective is very American, which is really problematic. And of course, I think the reason, right, that this network is so needed and so important, right? So to put people in conversation, my sense is that at least in the US, and it sounds like perhaps, in the UK, and maybe even in Israel, right, with STS and other places, right, that it's been very disciplinary based, right? So sociologists are talking to sociologists, philosophers are talking to philosophers. And I think what the MENA network has the potential to do is to bring different disciplines in a really place-based, right, level of expertise. But in the sociology of science and religion, we are very concerned, which I think is consistent with what the other speakers talked about, moving beyond the conflict narrative. So that has really been, I think, the anchor of a lot of work on science and religion. And I think many of us are, clearly aware that is a false, right? A false narrative in a lot of cases, right? And there's at least, in the very least, a lot of nuance, right, to what conflict means and when it happens. The other big divide has been in kind of elite versus public perspective. So historically, sociologists have really studied elites, right? And by this, we mean scientists or religious leaders, right? And so where my collaborative work intervenes is to try and better understand public perspectives, which is a very sociological, right? The other thing that we're increasingly trying to do, and again, I think this network has the great potential to do, and other disciplines have done this much better than sociology, is really understanding the diversity of science and religion. So I think that we generally in sociology understand and accept that there are really diverse religious views, but science, as I think, Noah discussed, is seen as, this empirical thing that is separate from politics and from states, right? And we simply know that in reality, that is not true, right? That systems shape the way that we understand and do and view science. And so in this kind of conflict area, we're really trying to understand, a lot of sociologists are trying to understand, I count myself and my collaborators in this, what domains are contested, right? So why is it that, evolution, is contested and climate change is contested, but other areas where in theory science and religion could come into contestation are not, right? And we are also really seeking to understand, again, I'm speaking primarily about the American context, but I think this perhaps tracks, right? Moving beyond the deficit hypothesis. For a very long time, unfortunately, our understanding of public perspectives on science and religion suggested that if people didn't appreciate science or didn't like religion or appreciate religion, it's that they just didn't know enough about it. And if we just went into the schools, right, and educated them, then, everything would be fine. And indeed, that has proven not to be the case, right? A lot of people are very well educated and still, right, view whether it be science or religion in different, sometimes negative terms, right? The other thing, and this is really the focus of my kind of strain of research at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit about how I got where I am, is really the morality of science, right? So again, we tend to see science, or we'd like to see science, perhaps better said, as amoral, not immoral, right? But something that doesn't have a lot to do with morality, maybe in picking the research question, right? But certainly not in the methods. But in fact, what we have found in the US is that, and a little bit with survey data globally that I'll share with you, is that in fact, a lot of people, and especially religious people that are skeptical of science or, are negative, right, hold some negative attitudes about science, view that disagreement is based on morality. So again, contradicting this deficit hypothesis that it's just a knowledge gap somehow. And then, of course, related to has been on understanding attitudes about evolution, and that is well-deserved and very, very important, right? It comes up in state building, it comes up in schools, right? As all of our previous three speakers have discussed, right? But now I think, at least in American sociology, we're trying to move beyond evolution and think kind of carefully about why it is and where it is, right? That different domains of science, right, come into conflict or don't with different domains of religion. So I wanted to share a little bit just of my research, and you can, I think I have a functioning Google Scholar page. I certainly have, a website if you want to look for the citations or shoot me an email. But it would be remiss of me not to note that my colleague, this lovely gentleman featured there, Tim O'Brien, who is a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, we are longtime collaborators, over a decade, I think, at this point, and all of this work is joint. So I just want to make that clear. So I've just pulled a few examples of the work that Tim and I have done. This is a 2018 paper, and basically our kind of career in science and religion started with our 2015 publication, where we used latent class analysis to kind of find types of people in the US and their perspectives on science and religion. And we found three kind of broad perspectives, right? So a traditional perspective that favors religion and is skeptical of science, a modern perspective that favors science and is skeptical of religion. Each of these are about 40% of the American population. And then what we call a post-secular perspective, right? That is appreciative of science and appreciative of religion. But tends to, in some domains, favor religious interpretations, right, of reality and of knowledge. The fourth that we didn't find, interestingly to us, right, social scientists love a 2x2 table, right? So we can think of science high-low, religion high-low. In theory, there's a perspective which is what we might call a postmodern perspective that really eschews both science and religion as sources of cultural authority, but we did not find that, at least in the US, and we've kind of replicated it as data has come out. So this data, as you perhaps can see in the small explanation, comes from combined data from 2016 to 2014, but we've since looked at the 2018, 2020 data from the General Social Survey. The other thing that we've done here, so this is really an extension, and you see the bars here, so I said around 40%. These are the averages in the US. And what you see here is we tried to kind of take an intersectional perspective on this. And so the bars represent, in the US, self-identified Latino women, Latino men, Black women, Black men, white women, and white men, right? And so with this research, what we find, right, is that there's variation in the ways in which people's identity, in this case, gender and ethno-racial identities, right, affect their perspectives on science and religion. And once again, this is something that we need a lot more work on. And survey data is the best data, right, that's suited to understand this. And of course, Tim and I are always greatly indebted to others, right, that do ethnographic, case study-based research to really understand these trends, right? But we have worked with survey data ourselves. We also published an article more recently, I think this is 2021, really looking at the politicization of science and religion. So I think, whereas our previous speakers have a lot of kind of really excellent historical, right, grounding, perhaps, one of the differences, and I think fairly typical among sociologists in this area, not that there's not a lot of people doing excellent historical work, but is really a focus on the contemporary. And so what you'll see here is the dotted lines is the Democratic Party. We're on the two-party system in the US, right? And the undotted line is the Republican Party. And we've just looked at attitudes, right? Confidence in science and religion, unadjusted for any kind of sociodemographic characteristics. And so what you see is that everybody appears to be losing confidence in religion, right? At least in the US on average, right? But the gap is getting bigger, right? So Republicans are losing trust more slowly, I guess you would say, right, than Democrats. And on the other hand, in terms of science, what we see very interestingly, right, is this reversal. So we start off with a strong, right, Republican confidence in science, right? And now Democrats, and indeed, I think this is consistent with those of you that, read about the US or think about the US, the Democratic Party is the more scientific party, right? It is the party that turns to the CDC. It is the party that believes in vaccines, right? To give a kind of COVID example, right? And again, our data doesn't allow us to really arbitrate why we have these kind of large scale shifts, but we do offer some explanations, again, based on excellent historical and other work. And primarily, right, science was tied up, I think, a little bit, as Noah discussed, with state building in the era of kind of the Cold War, right? You can think about the Manhattan Project, right? Science was associated with the military in the US in a way that it does not appear to be any longer. So, as I mentioned, more recently, Tim and I have moved to look at cross-national attitudes about the effects of science, right, and about the morality of science. So, this comes from a question from the ISSP. Am I going to get it right? The International Survey Something S program, which is a large cross-national data set. So, you'll see that. This is from 7,000 roughly respondents, right? And you'll see that we have the percent of respondents who disagree that science does more harm than good, right? And so you'll see, I think very clearly here that we do not have a lot of evidence from the Middle East and North Africa. You'll see Turkey here. That's really our one kind of representative. So even in our survey data, even as we've gotten better, right, at including more cross-national comparisons, right, we do not see a large representation of MENA, which I think is problematic, right? And you'll see here, right, that I've just pulled a little bit out of the table, right, looking at the effects of religious traditions, right? There's clearly things that are going on with those that identify as having no religious affiliation, right? And then, of course, those that self-identify as Muslim and Protestant. But again, this is a very kind of rough strokes, right, view of like 77,000 people from, you know, over you know, several dozen countries. Most recently, we've looked at this data, which comes from the World Values Survey. So again, 53,000. We've gotten a little better. We have Iraq up here, and then we have Jordan and Turkey and Algeria over here. But this is a question that asks, to what extent do you agree that science breaks down people's ideas of right and wrong, right? So the idea here is that science is impacting moral everyday decisions, and that again, as I spoke about in the first slide, might be really the source, right, of people's difficulty, right, with accepting or embracing science. And again, what these graphs, this one and the previous one, suggest is that there's quite a bit of cross-national variation, right? But also, as we saw, you know, in the little table, there's also net of where people are located geographically, important implications for religious traditions, right? No religious affiliation, as we saw, Protestantism and so forth. I'm also pulling out a third figure, which looks at marginal differences in the predicted agreement, right, based on education. And what we've done, and I think, again, the reason that this kind of network is so important is that we've kind of sorted countries based on 10th, 50th, and 90th percentile on whether it's a country that has comparatively low levels of investment in research and development, mid levels of investment, and high levels of investment, right? And what you'll see is that it's actually in countries with high levels of investment that there's the biggest educational differences between those with a graduate degree, right, and those with no formal schooling, right? And so Tim and I have made the argument in a couple of our articles, right, that what happens in countries that are have higher investment in science, it's actually not so much to do with science, but it's that in these kinds of pluralistic, right, and diverse countries, right, in terms of self-expression, that people's individual characteristics, right, race, ethnicity, education, right, whether they are ascribed, right, or whether they're achieved, become perhaps more salient, right, to their identity. So again, this is kind of our hypotheses moving forward, and we do find this to also be the case, right, for things like gender and other kinds of things. The gender seems to matter more, so to speak, as does this graph shows education in high R&D countries, which is capturing other kinds of things. Finally, we also try to look at number of Nobel Prize winners, right, as a country level characteristic. So. So I really want to wrap it up so that we can have some discussion. But, you know, again, I am pretending to speak for sociology, but I really want to walk that back. So please don't accuse me, right, of being, you know, a bad spokesperson. But, you know, my sense is, you know, especially, and you know, in addition with conversations from the people in the organizing committee, right, and other people here, is that the sociological study of religion really remains heavily US and Euro-centered, right? And so from, you know, my perspective, right, mine and Tim's, I would say, as people who are trying to do quantitative research, right, that is down a lot of times to the availability of data, right? So even the data sources that we discussed, the World Values Survey, there's some debate on really how representative they are of countries in the global south, right? Oftentimes they're fielded primarily in capital cities, which, you know, as we know from Michael, is not necessarily representative, right, of the whole country. The other important drawback, I think, at the moment is that it's really heavily focused on Christianity, right? So not that there's not a lot more work to do, right? But we really understand fairly well, at least sociologically in the US and in the UK, I would say, how people think, right, about science. But this is from a very kind of Christian perspective. And so I've pulled out maybe 3 kind of gaps and opportunities that to me, I think are the most exciting. And I think there are people kind of moving in this direction. But first, you know, is regional differences and religious differences, right? So I think what we lose in the type of survey data that Tim and I are using, right, is the idea of community, right? So we categorize someone as Muslim or Christian, and then we put them in the regression model, right? And it gives us information. I think it gives us important information about context, right? But understanding real communities of faith and real communities of practice, right? And the kinds of conversations that are ongoing. And I think, you know, Michael's second example, right? Noah's example, right, of the change over time, and even this recent tweet from this morning, right? And Steph classrooms and with teaching, right? There's dynamics that are kind of ill captured, right, by kind of broad strokes. The other thing that, and perhaps this is a personal bias because I find this really interesting, is that I don't think we've actually done a lot to arbitrate the difference between technology and science when we say science, right? And so I think, you know, again, you know, Noah's example is a perfect one, right? Is building a damn science, right? As a way to bring about, right, international, intercultural, interfaith, right, cooperation. And in the US, of course, when we talk technology, the current big debate is about vaccinations, right? But we can think about genetic engineering and all other kinds of technologies, and how and whether this is the same as science, kind of cognitively and culturally across contexts. And finally, you know, the idea of place-based investigation. So, you know, again, not to you know, not to kind of be too hard on my own work. Obviously, I do it because I think it's important, but you know, I think it is decontextualized in a lot of ways. That's what surveys give us. They give us broad strokes, they give us trends. But I think really place-based investigations, as we heard from our 3 previous speakers, each country, even each community, right, is unique. And there's something to be said for the ways in which communities evolve and kind of change, right, and think about science and religion in relationship to histories, to state and systems, right, and other kinds of things. So I think I will end with that. So thank you.
Wow. I think you will all agree with me that even if we had scripted all 4 of those different presentations, we could not have done a better job really touching on the key issues right now going on in research related to science and religion. And I'm excited to open it up to questions and conversations and comments between all of our speakers and everyone else. I've gotten a few notes of people who are interested in asking questions. If anyone else has, you can either write them in the chat, just let me know, and we will go around and go through each of the speakers. I thought maybe to head back to Stefano. There are a few people, I probably did the emphasis wrong that time, but you will correct me. I had a comment in my own experience working with some courses on science and religion that I wanted to just throw out there. And then I know Alper has claimed the first question to you, and I have a list of people for each of the other speakers. But one thought, which is not always a practical thought, but in one of the courses that I have taught, I have done it not as an individual, but we've had a few voices in the classroom as instructors, which maybe made me feel a little bit more comfortable. I think what you were talking about as, you know, since there is no perspective from nowhere and each of us is bringing a certain perspective with us, and how do you deal with granting how are you defining the spectrum sort of voices as some of the questions that you were talking about for students to feel comfortable and reflect with each other? Again, I don't know if it's possible in your case, but one of the approaches that I've been involved with is having multiple instructors in a single course, which is not always possible. And to Alper for the first question.
Thank you, Rachel. I really enjoyed all these presentations. First of all, thank you. So I'm also giving a lecture like this, the one delivering in Morocco, and I hear similar, reactions from students. So I was wondering, is there a common source that those students go and get those ideas from? Can you think of any? Because you also mentioned Harun Yahya, and I don't know if you read that article, but Glenn Moran wrote an article about the idea that, so he says, actually we're exaggerating the impact of Harun Yahya on Muslim youth. So it's not that he's not that strong, people really don't read his books. So I want to learn what are the sources of these students and their cliches. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for these questions and suggestions. I will try to reply to both, like in a joint reply. And let me also mention a question that I got in writing from Shoaib, who was wondering whether there is anything that I may identify as distinctly Moroccan, as regional or even local, about the reactions I get in class. So first of all, to Rachel's suggestion, yes, I do agree with that. I try to, this course has been an ongoing experiment, and perhaps I should have said courses rather than course. There have been multiple versions over 6 years, or rather 12 semesters, because that's how we should count time, academically, pedagogically, and a few summer sessions. And I try to bring in other voices. That has been done mainly in the form of online talks. But I also invited colleagues in person, such as Nida Al-Gussoum, Professor Rana Dajani, and Professor Pervez Hoodboy from Pakistan. It has been a bit challenging. And yeah, I agree with you. One should almost physically bring in more instructors. I should work on that. And then again, I'd love to team up with colleagues, including those who are currently participating in this session. That can definitely be improved. Now, to answer Shoaib's question, what is Moroccan about my students? Well, first of all, yeah, most of my students are Moroccan. I do get the occasional exchange student or a student from another part, another of the Muslim world, another Muslim country, but yeah, most of my students are Moroccan. What is specifically Moroccan about the way they think, about the way they react, I don't know. I honestly do not know. And now to reply to Alper's question, yes, I do agree. Perhaps of Harun Yahya, whom, by the way, I met some 10 years ago, as you may know. I have some stories about that I always share in class, much to my students' amusement. Yeah, I agree. Perhaps his influence is overstated, but then again, whence that resistance to evolution that I encounter in class? Well, it seems to be mostly coming from high school, from things that students have heard in high school. Then people like Harun Yahya may contribute to that with, the amount of material out there that students come across whenever they perform a simple Google search. But then again, I have no data. This not only because I'm no sociologist, I was really jealous when I saw Shiri's schemes, data, figures, and so on. But not only because I'm no sociologist, even if I were a sociologist, I am too busy. So I need someone to educate me on sociological methods, and I need someone to work with me. Then again, I'm not sure, working on a course that is imparted twice a semester with a total of 70 students maximum per semester would be sociologically relevant. But in case it is, and my question here is to the experts, then I need to work with someone. I need to team up. I hope this answers the questions. Thank you.
Amazing. I think one of the hope for goals was not only to coordinate collaboration within the region, but also across the oceans as well. Shoaib, I see.
So to put it somewhat more concretely, if anyone feels like educating me on, how to formulate a questionnaire, maybe one can be distributed at the beginning of the course and one at the end. They're most welcome. Thank you.
Shoaib, I see your hand. I had next Abdullah asking Noah a question. Did you want to jump in the meantime?
I just wanted to add something to Alper's question, and that is that Glenn is a friend of mine, and he in his survey he asked the average person on the street. So the average person on the street, the average Muslim, hardly is queued up about just Islam on a basic level, let alone controversies about Islam and evolution. And so I do believe that perhaps on that level, the data might be skewed, because if you go to people who are going to the mosque every day, which are not necessarily the people that he was interviewing, mosque leaders, not church leaders, or mosque leaders, right? You'll see that there's a heavy presence and awareness of Harun Yahya in those settings, not necessarily the average settings out there. But I do think that implicitly, because of these high-level folks, like for example, some of these American imams, they were celebrating Harun Yahya, Muzaffar Iqbal, and a few others, right? They were waving their books around, and that kind of has a social media trickle-down effect. So I think that may also play a part into it. But I believe that in Glenn's article, though gives us an interesting avenue, I think more could be said about that angle. Just wanted to relay that. And Stefano, just on your point about sociology, my colleague and I, we recently won a JTF grant where we're doing a scan of British imams in the UK, both qualitative and quantitative surveys, to get a full understanding of where they're looking at Islam and evolution. I'll be more than happy to pass any surveys that we develop. We haven't done them yet, but developed to your side, hopefully.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was an important addition. Thank you. And now, Abdullah.
Thank you all very much for all of your wonderful talks. I have a question for Noah. Of the Jewish people on science and religion. And my question is really in two parts, and they're very much related to each other. Do you see that there has been a shift in attitudes throughout history, especially in contemporary modern era amongst the Jewish people and science and religion? And are we really conflating science with itself? Because it is a very generic umbrella. Whenever we say science and religion, science is too general. Because, for example, while certain adherents might, on the one hand, have issues with certain scientific theories or those concerning bioethics, for example, on the other hand, we find that themselves, those who actually have certain issues, perhaps with these scientific theories or so forth, they would actually perhaps make good use of science and technology, such as using technology for those observing the Shabbat to do certain things that they would otherwise be unable to do, for example. So what are your thoughts about that?
Thank you, Abdullah. Well, about the first broad question that you asked, that has there been a shift in attitudes? I mean, historically, of course, there's been a shift in attitudes, and the most dramatic shift is can be situated, somewhere in the 19th and early 20th century of a great rise in interest among Jews in science in general. And while you're absolutely right that that science as a category is too broad, and Shiri, you were also right that the conflation of science and technology makes it even broader still and less meaningful, certainly less specific. There is a way in which that broad category is useful and crucial, I would say, in understanding Jewish attitudes particularly in the 20th century, and particularly in the Soviet Union, and the United States, and in Palestine, and what eventually became Israel, too. There was an enthusiasm for the very notion of science and technology, which were in the broadest and crassest sense, which were taken, I think, to be homologous with, or to be associated with, or a stand-in for modern democratic secularism. I think that it was taken to be inseparable, and there are decades in which it is very difficult to find Jews who have anything positive things to say about science and technology as these stand-ins, or proxies for modern progressive democracy. It is true that there were, and Rachel knows this better than I do, but it is true that there were always some Jews who had particular problems with relatively small number of Jews that had particular problems with evolution, and up through today, there are really quite small, and the problems that people had were not the same. Did not have the same kind of intensity that one found among Christians. But you would be hard pressed to find any of the enormous panoply of versions of Judaism that have thrived in modern times, and particularly since the 20th century, from secular Judaism, whatever exactly that might mean, and there are many varieties, to ultra-Orthodox Judaism, whatever that might mean, and there are many varieties. You would be very hard-pressed to find anyone who views science en masse, science in general, as being problematic. So they have specific issues with specific things, maybe, and rarely. But in general, the Jewish embrace of science, including among quite religious people, and who view Torah as being the absolute authority in all matters, and believe that secular knowledge is not of great value, you would be very hard pressed to find people expressing any problem with that. And so there is a way in which, when you try to get to the more specific and isolate, and like what you said at the end about how, of course, there are people who may have a problem with particular parts of science, but of course they use science for and technology for Shabbat, and always that is completely normative. There is no one who does not say science is almost no one who does not say science is a wondrous set of inventions and techniques that we embrace when it's useful, and we don't embrace when it's not useful. So I'm a little. I'm not sure that. I mean, maybe I'm not answering you. I'm a little, because the embrace was so sweeping. Then it's then I don't think that there is an enormous need or enormous value in pointing out the ways in which the very, very religious, non-secular, ultra-Orthodox Jews embrace science. They embrace science broadly, except for particular interpretations having to do almost exclusively with evolution. Then they are as pro-science as anyone you will find.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
no, appreciate that. Thank you, Abdullah, for the question. Shafiq, I noticed that you had your hand up for a while. Did you want to ask something or add something to the conversation? Shafiq, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I do.
Go ahead, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so hi, and first, congratulations on setting this MENA hub running up and running. So congratulations. My question is for Stefano, of course, because I'm from Morocco, and I taught philosophy in high school for 20 years. So a question was asked about what is specifically Moroccan in the attitude of the students toward the theory of evolution. So if there is anything specifically Moroccan, if any, that would be that in Morocco, students in high schools are taught philosophy for 3 consecutive years. So maybe that I think would make a difference. And the philosophy courses in high school in Morocco are molded according to the French model, because we inherited the teaching of philosophy from the French. So, and the teaching of philosophy in France and in Morocco is secular in mind. So there is no reference. There is no reference to religion or to God in philosophy course. So my question this brings me to my question to Stefano. So apart from the awful memories your students brings from their philosophy course in high schools, I mean, they had to learn by heart some stuff in order to pass the exam. Apart from these awful memories, did you see, for example, some of your Moroccan schools fire up some arguments that would come from their learning from the philosophy courses in high school? Because as I said, I taught philosophy for 20 years in high school, and now I am supervising teachers of philosophy in the high schools also. So in philosophy courses, yes, we don't teach the theory of evolution, but the mindset is evolutionary. For example, students are taught how the laws, morality, the state itself slowly emerged from a natural, initial natural state of chaos, of savagery. So there is certainly a mindset in the philosophy course in high school. So identified some of your Moroccan students using some arguments or counter arguments to the theory of evolution that you might identify as coming from their philosophy course in high school. Thank you.
Salam Shafiq, thank you so much for the question. Again, perhaps I was oversimplifying in my presentation. What I meant is that I am perceived as philosophy teacher. I am the one who teaches philosophy. Then again, it's a bit more complex than that, because as I said, the courses on Islam and science are offered as history of ideas. And in fact, some students tell me that they pick the history of ideas hoping it will be something completely different from philosophy that they used to hate in high school. So yeah, there are I mean, the dynamics are a bit more complex than I suggested through my presentation. Well, my short answer to your question is no. You mentioned this evolutionary mindset. If I understood you correctly. And I'm not sure any of this ever emerged. The students have little to no familiarity with the theory of evolution. Same thing goes for the method of modern science. Usually they identify Galileo Galilei as the guy who was, if at all, they identify him with the guy who was burnt at stake after claiming that the earth is round, which of course is highly inaccurate. I see Michael shaking his head and other participants as well. And yeah, I do fish for prior knowledge in relevant fields of relevant topics at the beginning of my courses, and I usually get wrong notions. I get wrong answers. I get a lot of resistance to the theory of evolution. I get the claim that you either are Muslim or you believe in the theory of evolution that anyways is a wrong one. And generally speaking, there's a distaste for philosophy, anything philosophical, and there is no familiarity anyways with the liberal arts model, the way in which I teach philosophy that eventually some or perhaps most of them come to like. But then again, I have no structured, I have no organized sociological data, and here I should really team up with some experts in the field. I'm no sociologist, and in any case, as I said, even if I were one, I'm too busy. So I need help here. I hope my answer is not too disappointing.
Well, I think we're all quite surprised that we only have 7 minutes left and we haven't even gotten to the vast majority of our questions. I'm just going to respond to what Noah was saying in 2 seconds. I actually see a lot of what you were speaking about, particularly in Judaism, as very much parallel in Islam and other traditions where people will be positive about science, but that positive versus negative is just like, you know, not the story. It's all how they're viewing the science and things like that. So I think that's a lot of the areas where we, in our discussions, have seen a lot of room for explorations together. Shoaib, I think you were on tap for a question to Michael, and then we will move on to Shiri.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say thank you to all the speakers. It was really a fantastic presentation from. So Michael, my question to you is mostly about your second article that you shared. So believe it or not, as soon as you popped it, I searched it, I quickly read it while you were going through your presentation. So what I wanted to ask was, you mentioned this shift from treating evolution from a controversy to more of a sensitive topic, right? And I've been making that, so I teach in a lot of seminaries, universities around the world. I can't do it here because of it's impossible to do it here, right? So and in my experience, when I say that expression, everybody's defense guards go down. I visibly see that I know it's a controversy, and I know everyone is aware that this might be problematic, but just hear me out. And that immediately kind of calms people down. I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to tell you that this is right or wrong. Just listen to whatever you have to say. And I was wondering, have you done any surveying where if you have a sensitivity framed approach versus a controversy framed approach, do you have any data on that, or is that still under development from your side?
So I certainly don't have any data, and I'm not intending to collect those data.
Right.
But I have huge admiration for academic sociologists, but I've had enough experience of developing properly validated instruments to know these things take a while. You can do it in other ways. You can do very valuable small scale qualitative approaches, etc. But it will be good to look at a range of ways, probably, of teaching evolution, a range of ways, because I'm always terribly keen to start getting onto the specifics of what's actually helpful to the diversity of students. And you may know very well, you probably almost certainly do, but not everybody may do, there's a huge literature on whether what we're seeking when teaching evolution is understanding of the theory of evolution, which is roughly speaking where I situate myself, or whether we're trying to get students to accept the theory of evolution. And I just think for a number of reasons, the acceptance one is not the route really to go down. It's quite enough just to help people to understand it. And of course, in some societies, it's extremely valuable to have people understanding why some people are not able to accept the theory of evolution. I think it's hardly a deep insight, but the world could do with a lot more understanding of other people's positions nowadays.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
And Shiri, you have certainly been a rock star of this panel, as everyone wants you to collaborate with them to mine data from their courses and elsewhere. But hopefully we have at least a minute or two to respond to your presentation. I had half a question. I'm gonna pretend I'm not throwing it out or asking it and then turn it over to Raleigh. I think I was a little bit surprised about the democratic, when you said the views of religion really going down until 2016. And I was wondering if you think that's changed at all in the last 6 years, and if you think if other words were used, more spirituality and less religion, if those figures would be different. That's one of the questions I'm not asking, and I'm having Raleigh ask the question.
I just had a question for everybody, whoever wants to chime in, from the panel or from the participants, about something that was mentioned offhand by different speakers at different times about the conflict thesis and where we stand with regard to it. And every time I hear someone discussing it, it always comes from a specific point of view, often from a European point of view, as a very European construct, but not always. And I was wondering if there could be some kind of approach, something that maybe we as a group can start hashing out, to try to map out what is going on with different versions maybe of the conflict thesis, and where it stands today. Because on the one hand, we talk about transcending it and talking beyond it, and on the other hand, I can hear Shoaib talking about, there are topics that I can't even discuss in certain places. So we're at different places, like, I just wanted to get anybody's perspective on this, because for me it's like a whole mystery wrapped in an enigma that I would like to get any input on.
So Shiri, you have 30 seconds to explain the status of the field and all issues.
Go.
I'll just go ahead and say, I'll answer your non-question, Rachel, which is I think it's continuing. And I think in the US, religion and science as a political identity, which is perhaps unique, perhaps not, right? We need more research. But I think where sociologists are with the conflict thesis, and again, I mean, I'm a mixed methods researcher, so I do qualitative research, but not on science and religion. I think a lot of the problem for us as sociologists with the conflict thesis is the question of measurement. So when you ask a survey question, it's like, oh, to what extent do you agree that they're in conflict, or where do you see the conflict? Even in interview studies, you're setting it up as conflictual. But I don't think that is necessarily incorrect in the US. But my sense is that at least in the US, we want to move a little bit beyond it because of the points I think that Michael and Noah and even Stefano made, right? That conflict is often domain specific, or views of conflict, right? Where science appears to interfere, overstep its magisteria, right? In one famous formulation is very specific, right? So in Israel, I know, reproductive technologies are very, religiously accepted and, very popular. Among other communities, that's really seen as interfering with quote unquote God's work, right? So yeah, and I'll stop there so that other people can chime in.
As I understand, Michael's dad was a famous gynecologist who worked worldwide on reproductive technology, so he can give us more of an insider's view on that as well. But I do think we have strangely, very quickly come to the end of our 2-hour period. But I think this is leaving me and hopefully everyone else with a taste for a lot more in the months ahead. So rather than try and give enough praise to our speakers, which I would fail at, I'm just going to say thank you again to everybody, and really looking forward to continuing the conversation in all sorts of forums in the future. So thanks everyone. Happy Sunday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. This was fantastic. We hope to see you guys again at one of our events. And yeah, have a good day, everyone. Take it easy, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations.
If anyone has, I did try to put the CFP there in the chat. If anyone has students, colleagues, anyone else who wants to apply for these small grants, that is one of our next pushes. So that's another promo plug. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.